Hello and welcome everybody. This is Natasha Helfer Parker and this is Symmetry Solution Strategies, which is our typical Friday lunchtime type of time frame where we come on for about 15 to 20 minutes and tackle a topic that's come up from our audience questions. So feel free at any point to ask questions either privately or on our threads of maybe topics you'd like for us to address in the future. Usually about 2 or 3 or 4 of us will get on and talk about a certain topic. So today we thought we'd address a question that we get actually quite often in lots of different forms. And we're actually going to be doing a presentation at Sunstone on this topic, which is kind of the what if syndrome. And this is a very typical way that this shows up is, what if I could be in a better marriage than I currently am in? You know, what if I could be having a better sex life than I currently have? What if the quality of my life isn't exactly what it should be? Which are all, I think, very fair assessment type questions that come up from time to time. And especially as we hit certain developmental phases of our life, they're supposed to come up as part of the ways that we recalibrate and kind of re-navigate the waters of our lives. And at the same time, I think we can all understand why it can be a little scary if some of those questions are going to lead to decisions that maybe feel risky or that we're taking unrealistic expectations to a point where now we're going to be suffering from some of these normal questions versus benefiting from them. So I thought we would kind of just touch on that topic. And Jana, you had maybe I have Jana Spangler, by the way, with us today from Salt Lake City, Utah, and also Tami Harris, also from Salt Lake City. Well, not exactly Salt Lake. Where are you at, Tami, again?
Kaysville. I'm up north. I'm up in the northern parts.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So a little bit north of Salt Lake area. Both coaches for Symmetry Solutions, both work in areas of kind of couples, counseling, also faith transition work. And I know Tami in particular has an interest in divorce counseling and discernment and things of that nature. So just through personal things that she's been through in her own life. So we come at this from lots of different angles. Anyway, I thought we'd start off, Jana, with you talking a little bit about how this shows up, has shown up recently with some of your cases and clients, and which I think it's true for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, you know, like I said, I work with a lot of people who have been through some sort of a faith transition, and I think this is kind of a normal thing that crops up to see with people who have really changed, been through a recent change in the paradigm of the way that they're looking at their lives. And I think this happens with faith transition. I think this just happens in life too, because we all continue to develop through our lives, you know? So many of us start to see things as we start to see things in different ways, become aware of more things in our life. We can start to ask these questions. So, you know, we start to notice, especially in a faith transition, we can start to notice, well, you know, I had one way that I thought my life was going to go, and I had my certain expectations of what marriage and what relationship would bring me. And now that I'm rethinking my whole life, I'm also rethinking how hard I've been working at things in our marriages, because I think we rarely talk about our marriages. We rarely talk about the fact that marriage is hard, marriage is difficult. We live in America where we are all brought up on Disney, and we think that it should all just be fabulous. And you know, when we're raised up in a religion like the LDS religion, it can just, you know, our fairy castle is the temple, and like what we don't really talk about what makes a good marriage, other than you just do it there, you get married there, and then things should just work out. And if you're just being nice and Christ-like, like, it all works out. So we tend to idealize what this can be. And when we notice that our life is bringing us something different than we expected, then we start to wonder if this is maybe just not the right situation. Did we enter this too young? Did we enter this for the wrong reasons? Was it all based on my religion? Is there really enough here to keep us together? So those are some of the questions that I see start coming coming up for people because we don't want to deal with the fact that marriage is hard. But then the question comes up, is it too hard? Like, or is this just a bad situation? So is it our expectations that are off, or am I really in a bad situation, and how do I know?
Yeah, right. How do we know? Tami, what are some thoughts from you in regards to kind of this dilemma of, I think most of us would probably agree that, yeah, I can't expect everything to be peachy keen every day. And at the same time, I probably don't want to be miserable the rest of my life. So where's the in-between stuff?
I mean, ultimately, that's the biggest question on really, are we taking in what other people have told us, this idea and concept? I loved how Jana explained kind of the Disney and happily ever after, because what happens is when we're growing up and we're raised, it's like, this is the goal, this is the goal, this is the goal, but there's not a lot of conversation once you meet that goal. But it's like, okay, now you just figure it out, right? And so I think there becomes a lot of insecurities and a lot of doubt, especially when it's not looking and it's not feeling like the image that you were given or that you brought up in your mind growing up. Like, where's the happily ever after? What does that mean in the first place? And it's hard too, because the longer you go, you know, it's exciting and it's fun and it's very honeymoonish, and then we get into a space where it's not, and the work kicks in. And I mean, work isn't good or bad, it just is. But then where are you on the same playing field? And what happens when it gets to a point that it's like that you start losing yourself, and or your partner starts losing themselves, and where there it's more of, you know, you're pulling the rope on opposite sides instead of carrying it alongside. So and also when you get to that point, I think really a hard thing to do is to separate the emotion from your critical thinking, from not taking it personal and saying, hey, are we at this crossroads to where the roles of significant other just don't work for us anymore? Like, we could be amazing co-parenters, but you know, but what if we've both changed so much it's just not working, it's becoming toxic? Like, how can you learn to be able to look at and see when it becomes toxic versus you're just trying to bail out of a situation? And that's really a hard balance to get to when taking the emotion out of it, something that's so emotional.
Yeah, those are all such good points. And I also appreciate the Disney reminder, because the happily ever after, which actually I was a big fairy tale reader when I was a young child, so it was way before Disney, that with the happily ever after came about. But it's interesting how all of the stories that we grow up hearing lead up to the happily ever after, and that time frame that we usually see, which is the courtship, which is in most movies, most stories, most songs, most poetry, leads to then this little moment that you say happily ever after, which is like the 50-year, the 50-year trajectory that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, role modeling, having realistic expectations about, et cetera. And so I think it's interesting how life consistently invites us within this tension between stability, wanting things to stay status quo, while also inviting us to shift and change and grow and age. And, you know, life just kind of moves along and is constantly shifting, whether you like it or not, right? And so those two tensions are consistently present, and why I think it's so important to I don't know that anybody's ever going to get to a point. I mean, maybe that's not, I shouldn't speak in absolutes. I'm sure there's people who are 100% sure they should get divorced, but I'm not sure that most of us have, get to a point where we're like, I'm 100% sure we should have stayed married, right now, or 5 years ago, or whenever the last time was that we were considering these types of topics, or that we should have gotten divorced. And so part of the reality is being comfortable at some level, living with some consistent unknowns, right? And why consistent unknowns are difficult is because when you're on the roller coaster ride of life, it's very easy on your good days together, if you're in a couplehood, to feel like we're making the right decision, we're still married, right? Or on those moments when you're not having a good time, or having a fight or a conflict, or maybe the sex didn't go great that night or whatever, to feel like, I don't know that this is really where I should be. And I think that can also happen on the divorce route, right? There can be moments where you can feel like you can have a really good day, you feel really independent and happy that you're free and have more autonomy. And then other days where you're lonely or missing a certain aspect of your relationships. And so you can sit with a lot of doubt. So one of the things I talk about is, if we can shoot for 70% certainty, that might be a good place to realistically be at when we're kind of making these long-term decisions. Any thoughts about how to just gauge that very uncomfortable, messy space of not exactly knowing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to quote you, whatever decision we make, getting comfortable with the idea that no decision we make is consequence free. I love the way that you said that. There are going to be consequences no matter what we choose. Sometimes we grow up imagining that if we just find the right way to be, if we marry the right person, if I find the right job, if I find the right whatever, then somehow my life will just go well. I mean, sure, I'll have a bump in the road once in a while, but I wouldn't be having these kinds of problems, right? And so we can get into those same kinds of problems as we assess this, because we imagine that if I just change my circumstances, then somehow it will all work out. So I think one of the things that can be really important in trying to assess this, am I really in a bad toxic situation, or do I just have unrealistic expectations, or there's maybe some combination there. But to really start getting at that, I'm just such a big fan of getting quiet and tapping into ourselves and trusting our own guts and starting to notice what is happening with us. So I talk to people a lot about the fact that we're people who do not love feeling discomfort. That's just part of the human experience. And so we have adapted really good ways to avoid feeling what we're feeling. If it's uncomfortable, most of us don't want to sit and feel that feeling. We want to immediately go into our heads and start imagining all the ways we can get around it. Or we want to distract ourselves from it. We think if we just pay attention to something else, it'll go away. Sometimes that can work. Sometimes you can distract and that feeling goes away. But if this is really something that is important in your life, trust me, it will come back. It will not be ignored, and it will come back over and over and over. And if you're noticing some recurring questions coming up, I recommend slowing down and paying attention to that. Don't try to figure it out right away, but just allow your body to feel it and notice and do some self-validation that, you know what, I'm having these feelings for probably a pretty good reason. My life has brought me to the point where it's trying to tell me something, and it's well earned, and I got here honestly. So what if I just sat and listened to that for a minute and paid attention to what it is trying to tell me? Then when we're able to do that and mine some of the wisdom that's coming from the discomfort, that gives us a little more freedom to say, okay, is this something that I'm projecting onto my partner? Is this something is this something really that is a big problem that needs to be addressed? Have I tried to address that? Have we been to a counselor? Have we been somewhere where we can, or a coach, where we can talk through some of this and have a third party look at this? Sometimes that can be helpful to discern, because we all have blind spots when it comes to ourselves. That's also just part of life. I don't know why we evolved to be in a place where we are most blind to ourselves, but it's often the case. So those are two of the things that come to mind for me: getting outside help and just learning to start to pay attention to the discomfort and not try to fix it immediately.
Love it. What about you, Tami? Any thoughts? Is either questions people can be asking themselves or strategies to be thinking about as they're meandering through these kind of turbulent things to be thinking about?
Well, I really loved what Jana had to say, especially something that really hit home for me when she said about going quiet and to ourselves. I think, especially in my experience growing up, I didn't really have a lot of faith and trust in myself. And so when I would have something come to my mind, I would always go out and talk to people. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And all good intentions, all, you know, people would give me their advice and give me their ideas, all well-intentioned, but it also was coming from their experiences and their life stories. And so I would never really, and then I'd always second guess myself and normally not go, you know, not heed what I feel like that my inner knowing was telling me, or, you know, and the situation is change is uncomfortable and it's hard. And it, especially pivotal situations like this, it's terrifying. But what I found is when I would really sit with myself and ponder, give myself the space, the same answer would continually come back. And it wasn't about anybody else, it was about me. And it was hard for me because I thought, oh, well, if I'm doing this for my happiness or for what I think is best, is that a selfish thing? So again, so my advice, and from my experience, is you may feel fear. You may feel really uncomfortable, but if you sit and you're quiet with yourself, you will also get that underlying just knowing that, hey, I just need to take this step and trust that whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And just trust in yourself. Like, it's a really hard thing to do, but you'll know, we know. And I mean, you just sometimes have to step through that fearful part of it, and knowing that you might be setting off a bomb to some effect. But if you don't do, I mean, you could be setting off a bomb, but then if you wait, it will continue to come back, and then it will be nuclear, and the carnage will hit more than just you and your person. It will hit a larger amount of people, and that cleanup is a lot more painful. So just from my personal experience.
Well, that's reminding me, for some reason, that we live here in Utah and they do avalanche like TNT, right? Like sometimes not all bombs are bad, right? Like
exactly.
it may blow up a few things that are unpleasant, but in the long run, there's dramatic enough change that needs to shift, right? Or something along those lines. Yeah, I like that.
And you know what? It's like, it's not going to change things. It's not going to make anything greener. And you're still going to deal with hard stuff. It's just going to be different hard stuff. And you'll manage it. You know, you just manage it. But sometimes it's hard. It's really scary to have the courage sometimes to raise the white flag. It takes a lot more courage to raise the white flag and surrender than it is to fight into the death. Because when you fight to the death, all there is death. So, you know.
I like that. I thought I would bring up Barry McCarthy. You know, he has the good enough sex model is what he talks about. And I just want to bring this up because I do think that a lot of what the question is about is, am I having unrealistic expectations, or is my level of distress serious enough that I do need to be doing something to shift where I'm currently at? So Barry McCarthy's a good enough sex model. He's a sexual educator here in the United States of America, has been at this work for a long time. And I really love his books and I've done a few podcasts with him anyway. He says, when you do research on long-term couples that have been together like 20 plus years, they typically will report their sex life looking something like 60 to 65% of their encounters are good. We got off, we had fun. Good enough, right? And then like 25 to 30% of the encounters being like, holy cow, right? Like that was awesome. I totally got turned on. I had a super intense orgasm, or I don't know, got to play around, or we got to be a little bit more playful or have fun, or I don't know, think about a fantasy, whatever those things are that, take it to the next level. And then like 10% of the encounters just suck. Like they're just bad. Like, I don't know, erections didn't happen, or orgasm didn't happen, or lubrication didn't happen, or whatever. And they just gave up, or, just called it a night, or whatever those things are. So that's kind of, I think, what we're getting at. In a lot of ways, marriage is like that too. Most of everyday life is just kind of every day. It's okay. It's not anything superb and fantastic, but it's doable, and it's stable, and it's nice enough, and then there's moments where it's just really amazing and super connective and intimate and romantic, even, whatever those things are that are exciting to you. And then some of it just sucks, and you fight and you argue and you have conflict and you have a bad day and you hurt each other's feelings, et cetera, et cetera. So that, so I'm usually saying if you're getting about like 60 to 75% of your needs met in a primary relationship, you're probably doing pretty well. And you've got to make sure that you've got lots of other resources too, like friends or hobbies or your career, or your identity, or parenting, other ways that you get your needs met that aren't primarily focused on your partner. However, if things are, to a point where, not just from a conflict perspective, it's not that you have to beat each other up or hate each other's guts to not be compatible anymore, but if there's really a severe sense of dissatisfaction or incompatibility or growth happens, I think it's Esther Perel who says, if you're going to live 60 years with in a relational part of your life, more than likely you're going to have 2 to 3 marriages. You're going to have to just decide if it's going to be with the same person or not. Is in a way a shout out to how we as individuals are just going through our own shifts and changes. And when you're partnered with somebody, those shifts and changes can happen in compatible ways, or small things can, like ships in the sea, start becoming very large, unfortunate, kind of separations between people. And a lot of people, are doing that these days in ways that are fairly amicable and healthy. And like you said, one of you mentioned co-parenting, and do that well, et cetera. So there's lots of ways to do that don't have to be catastrophic. So what I would say about those decisions, the only 2 things that I would say is, one, be very wary if you're in the decision process while going through a big shift in your life. So big shifts in life are helpful because on the one hand, they invite things, but I also think that we should have pause buttons, because sometimes whether it's a faith transition or a death in the family or an unemployment or a 40th birthday or, whatever those things are, you can have some intense energy that's short-lived, that if you make long-term decisions in that short amount of space, you may have wanted to have a little bit more time, right? So, and by time, I mean like 6 months to 18 months. I'm not talking about 10 years. I'm talking about like just a little bit of time to pause. And then the second thing I would just encourage people to do is to remember that hindsight is a bitch, right? I'm not the one who came up with that, right? Like that's so it's good because it's nice to be able to look back, but hindsight also in of itself is a story. And we tend to simplify stories, right? Like, oh, we met when we were so young. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. So of course now we're incompatible, right? But that's a very simplistic reason as to why 2 people get married. And I would venture to say it's usually not a very good, black and white reason to think about the complexities of why 2 people come together. So to just be careful about the current storylines, right, that we tend to simplify instead of complicate, because then you're just kind of setting yourself up for potential failure and new simplistic stories that will be just as dissatisfying as where you come from. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I know we've been at it here for a little while, but I'd like to give you each both a chance to closing thoughts about all of this, and we'll move on.
Yeah, so I love what you're saying, Natasha. You know, I think that we all do make stories. We're meaning making people, so we try to put stories around a lot of things, and it's not always horribly accurate, right? So just having a gut check on that. Another thing I'll just say is that so many of us in our Disney culture and our Jerry Maguire, you complete me, we have these unrealistic expectations of relationship. And sometimes it can be helpful just to recognize that relationship can also be a path to growth. You know, if we live by ourselves up in the mountains, yeah, we're not going to get irritated by other people very often. We're also not going to have as many opportunities for growth. And if you notice that your relationship, every time you're getting upset with someone else or you're getting bugged by someone else, is actually telling you something about you, and maybe something from childhood wounding to just personality things, but it's you can learn a lot about yourself and your edges of where you need to grow by being in a relationship. If you look at it that way, it tends to be a different experience than if we were expecting it to be the fairy castle and living in, you know, happily ever after.
I love that. Yeah, I love that, Jana. Thank you. Tami, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say much more than what you guys both shared, except, you know, just want to bring back a little bit from what I say. And what I love what Jana said is you need to check yourself first. You need to look at yourself first. If you're finding that you're placing blame on everybody else and everything else, and that you're a victim, maybe you are a victim in some aspects, but you're also creating this situation. So self-awareness and mindfulness is truly key in all of this. And I mean, it's just, I don't know, I love it. So, but ultimately check yourself first, but also trust yourself and take time. Don't, you know, it's not triggered by emotion. Like, allow that time to settle in, and you know, but ultimately trust yourself and check yourself all at once.
I love it. Well, thank you. These wonderful women are at Symmetry Solutions. They're both wellness coaches and work with couples and individuals on lots of different aspects of life, especially faith transitions, life transitions, marriages, marital transitions, etc. So feel free to look us up at symmetrysouls.com. I'll make sure and link to that. Several of our providers are providing some either free initial consults or discount rates during this COVID time. We know that it's a financially difficult time for many, so we want to make sure our services are somewhat you know, doable or accessible to people. And we also try to do a lot of these blogs and Symmetry Solution strategies to give you other types of resources, recommendations, etc., to help you on your journey of self-care and self-adventure and well-being and health in your life and with your family and the people who you love. So thank you all for spending some time with us today on Friday. Let us know if you have any questions you'd like for us to address, and we'll put it in the queue. Have a good weekend, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.